Everyone around me is now talking about moving abroad.
Really? Why?
Oh, it's probably my generation thing, and maybe it's because we finally can, or it's much easier for us than it was for other generations. But the thing is, should we do it?
Well, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And there are obviously upsides and downsides to going to live in another country.
So, is that what we are talking about today? If the grass is really greener?
This isn't a podcast with all the answers
It's a conversation about figuring things out as you go
from two very different generations.
with Michelle R. Williams.
And Nick Hurst.
Welcome to Life Happens.
I think everyone experiences at least one time in their life when they think that the grass is greener somewhere else, that going and living in another country will be better, more exciting, make you happier, richer even, possibly. But the reality can be more challenging.
Yes, there are so many challenges that people who didn't experience it don't even realize. And that's why we are here. We are not here to romanticize it, but to give you sort of an experienced reality check and to hopefully show you that despite all of these challenges, it's still so worth it.
And we do have some experience of this, both of us coming from different countries, different cultures. Michelle from Czechia, me from England. And we have both lived in different countries. And in fact, I still am. It's a long time since I lived in England. So I've really moved around quite a bit. Now you're talking about your generation being really keen to experience life in other countries. Is that right?
I feel like the idea of moving abroad is hugely popular in my generation. And obviously, I can only judge my generation, but judging based on the generation of my parents or like somewhere in between, I think that my generation is really talking about it. And you basically can find it in any conversation because I think that a lot of it has to do something with social media, which has its biggest boom in my generation. And we sort of see the world around us and we sort of experience it through that. So the idea is definitely there. The thing is that I feel like people are talking more about the idea than actually acting on it. Because if I can tell you all the people that I had this conversation with, all of my friends ever said, I really want to move abroad. Like, I really want to live in this country, and so on and so on. But how many of them actually did it? Me, and so far, one of my friends. But, it doesn't really, the numbers don't really match. But funnily enough, despite me being the one who recently came back from living abroad and who will be moving abroad pretty soon again, you are the one of us who has more experience with moving abroad, as you already mentioned. So give us your takes on that.
Yeah, well, in England we have an idiom, me and my idioms, always got to get one in early.
It wouldn't be proper episode without at least one idiom at this point.
Absolutely. We completely talk in idioms. And this one is travel broadens the mind. Do you know that one, that idiom?
Yeah, of course.
Do you have a similar saying in Czech?
I think so. Can't now remember it because my brain switched into English, but I think it's pretty general saying. So yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sure we
yeah.
do.
Yeah, I think it's so true. And ever since I was a little boy, really, I always wanted to travel. I don't think I went abroad until I was maybe 10. And my parents took me on holiday to the south of France by train. So that was my first experience of traveling. I was 13 before I actually flew in an airplane. And boy, was that exciting. I just loved it. But the whole point of traveling just seemed so exciting and so exotic to me. And I just knew that I wanted to do lots more of it. And as I got older, I always kind of saw myself living in different countries or a different country. I didn't really know where, but I just felt that it would be something that I would do and that I would be just a visitor to my home country. And that's kind of how it proved. It all started when I was 30 and I moved to Saudi Arabia for work. I got a job there as their first ever professional broadcaster on their English language television station and their English language radio station. I say professional broadcaster. Up until then, they had been using volunteers to come in, expats. So in the daytime, you would get expats' wives coming in and working the radio station, and to an extent, the TV station. And then in the evening, you would get the husbands who had finished their daytime jobs, and then they would come in and work in the evenings. And then when I arrived, I was brought over because they were expanding the output of the TV station, and it had this brand new television station built. So they needed staff, basically. So I went there and got an amazing amount of experience of broadcasting that would have taken 10 years to get in England, because I was doing everything. I was presenting various radio programs, including a daytime music-based show, such as we would recognize in the UK or the US or Czechia, music, chat, making it light and so forth. And then on TV, I would present various different weekly programs. I used to present this flagship documentary come variety show every week, which was a really bizarre mix of topics. You'd have like a serious, newsy, current affairs type topic, followed by some people dancing in the studio. And I was the studio presenter, and occasionally would get to go out and do interviews on location. And the other thing that I presented was the news every night or most nights. And they would have two presenters, one who would be a Saudi and who would present the Arabic news, but in English. And then I would present the news from the rest of the world in English. So that's what I was doing. So the work was really quite interesting and absorbing and certainly time consuming, because I would tend to work from 11 in the morning till midnight, or just gone midnight, I would generally finish, which is fine because there's not really much else to do. Other side of that is that culturally, Saudi Arabia is very, very different. And I was not living in a compound with other Westerners, with either English or Americans. I was just living in an apartment in Riyadh. So culturally, it was very different and took quite a lot of getting used to. When I was first there, I would walk to the TV station every day, which was take me about 20 minutes in amazingly hot weather. And eventually I got a car that had air conditioning, so it made life a little bit easier. So that was my first experience of living and working abroad. Eventually I'd returned to England after a couple of years, and then I worked there for years and years and years, the BBC, and then subsequently with other broadcast outlets. These jobs that I did gave me a lot of travel opportunities. So I was moving around the world a lot. I went a lot to the Far East, particularly Hong Kong, but also Thailand. I went a lot to the United States to make programs, and I actually went and lived there for a short while because I made a whole series of programs basically about American rock music. So I spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, then a certain amount of time in San Francisco, and then finally in New York, basically interviewing various musicians, rock stars, and so forth, and also people in the music industry, just to build up a whole picture and make a series of documentary programs about American rock music, which was great fun. So I still was traveling a lot. I should also mention that before I moved to Saudi, when I was an actor, I did work for two theatre companies in Wales, one after the other. So I literally just finished one job and then the following week started a new one. So in total, I was in Wales for a year. Now, I know Wales is part of the United Kingdom, but it still has its own identity, its own culture. They do have their own language, of which I learnt a little bit, not much, but I can say thank you. Diolch yn fawr. It's Wales for thank you. And I toured around Wales with the first company I worked for there, which was based in Cardiff. And I've actually, as an actor, I have actually played every major theatre in Wales bar one. And because of that, I've travelled all over the country, which I really appreciated because Wales is stunningly beautiful, very mountainous. And the more you go up into North Wales, and we went everywhere, you have mountains and also people there tend to speak Welsh as the first language. In the south, they will speak English as the first language. So that was experiencing another culture within the United Kingdom. And Wales has its own parliament, and actually they have some laws that are different as well, particularly relating to drinking in certain parts of Wales. And I'm thinking of somewhere in the centre I was staying, and it was on a Sunday night. And I was staying in a hotel with other members of the company, and you weren't allowed to drink. Alcohol was not allowed for the locals. But because we were hotel residents, we could drink. So it had this absurd situation where I was sitting at a bar with a pint of beer in front of me, and the person next to me, because he was a local who lived there, had a cup of coffee. That's just absolutely ridiculous. And I felt so guilty for doing that.
Do you realize that you just mentioned laws, drinking laws in Saudi Arabia and now in Wales in like the last 5 minutes?
Well, I knew that would appeal to you, so I just focused on that.
What does it say about you, Nick? I wonder.
It just says that I remember where you can drink and where you can't drink, just so that I can tell people like
Very
you.
useful. No, I think that's very, very educational. Yes.
It's one of the things that you will notice when you travel. And that's why travel broadened my mind. It's just such a weird thing that you would have a law that meant that people who live in somewhere every day, it's their home, but they are not allowed to drink on one day of the week. And yet somebody who's just passing through can. It just seemed a little bit absurd to me. But I do believe that that law has changed now, and that things have come much more into the 21st century. Of course, when I was there touring Wales, it was the 20th century, because it was quite a few years ago. I subsequently left England many years later. This is about 15 years ago. And I went and lived with my family in the island of Jersey, which is part of a group of islands called the Channel Islands. They are basically a protectorate of the United Kingdom, but they're actually just off the coast of France. So there's, I don't know, I think there's 5 islands. Jersey is the largest, and I went to live there for a year. Fantastic place. Really, really beautiful place. But the problem with living on an island is getting off it, because it's always costs lots of money. You either got to fly or you've got to take a ferry. It creates a sort of certain feeling of being closed in, of being imprisoned almost. And the locals used to describe it that there were 90,000 people living on this lump of granite poking out of the English Channel right by the coast of France, who were desperately trying to get off this island. That's how they saw themselves. I mean, the life there is very nice, and it's actually the world's first tax haven. So it has very low taxes. So you get a lot of very wealthy people will relocate to Jersey because they're not going to have to pay loads and loads of tax. So that's when I left England and never actually came back, because from there we moved to Czechia. And so I lived there for 12 years, 13 years, something like that. And then just last year, 2024, moved to Brussels in Belgium, where I'm speaking from now. So now I don't know where home is. Home is where I lay my hat, basically. But I can say that I am a big fan of and very supportive of moving abroad, moving around the world, and enjoying that fact. But that's not to say there aren't challenges. There's always going to be challenges. You must have found challenges when you went to America.
Absolutely. And I don't want to say that it was because I moved to America, but to be fair, I wasn't expecting it to be such a huge difference because, you were talking about your first experience, which is basically Saudi Arabia. And I think that we can all imagine that living in England or basically anywhere in Europe and then moving to Saudi Arabia will be a huge difference. But I was not expecting to experience that difference even in America. At the same time, thinking about it, nowadays, moving to America in 2025, not the best place to move, but like definitely an interesting experience. And, as you already hinted at, that was my first experience moving abroad and living abroad. Thinking about it, I have quite a lot of traveling experience, even, in my quite short life, because my family traveled a lot. So I basically visited like, I don't know, 80-90% of Europe, which is quite a lot, and I'm so happy about it. I always loved it. I think I take that after my father, who loves traveling, even though he's someone who would never move abroad, but he travels a lot. And so, I was just always tagging along. And as a kid, you don't really see the difference. For you, it's just a yay trip. I don't have to go to school. I will eat good food and live in a hotel for a while, or so on and so on. But thinking about it and remembering it now, I think I took a small piece of something from each of these countries that I visited, which I really love. And to this day, I absolutely love traveling, even if it's, for a very short time. But moving to America was my first huge experience. And not only that, but it was also my first time living on my own in general. So quite a lot to take in. But I mean, I loved it because, you already mentioned that you felt, even as a kid, that you will one day live abroad. I'm the same. I'm literally the same. I genuinely believe that since I was like 5 years old, like literally a kid, I was always telling everybody that, first of all, I will move abroad. But what I started telling everybody was that I will marry a foreigner. Literally. When I was 5, and that's one of the best stories my grandpa tells to this day, that when I was 5, I told him that I don't like my last name and that it doesn't matter because I will marry a foreigner anyway and I will have a foreigner last name. A 5-year-old. I'm sorry. Where did this come from? I have no idea. Mind you, no one in my family has ever moved abroad. My family, apart from my dad, hardly ever traveled. So I don't know where it just appeared within me, but I think it's something you are just bored with. I think it's something that you just feel as a kid. And if you don't feel it, it will never cross your mind. But if you do have it within you, it will just be with you your whole life. And that's something that I have. Every time I'm abroad, basically no matter where I am, I just feel so alive and so happy. And there's this part of me that just feels different. And I don't think it's only connected to being on vacation, because we are all happy on vacation because, we can relax and do what we want. I don't think that's the part of it. I think there is just something much deeper that just makes me feel so free anytime I travel. And that's why I love it. And despite, America was never my country of choice, honestly. I always wanted to visit it because basically I want to visit every country. I never wanted to live there. I was always, I feel like, pretty realistic when it came to that. And I never really bought that American's dream thing because maybe I believe that at certain point in time it was true that people went to America to live this dreamlike life. Nowadays it's definitely not, and as a European you are very aware of that. And so going to America, I went there with more like wanted to experience living abroad in general, and to see what it will bring to me and to see what it will unlock within me, and so on and so on. Living in America, I don't want to get much into it right now because I'm sure that we will get into it again in some future episodes because it's a huge topic. And not to offend any Americans, but let me tell you, everything we think about America in Europe is right. I went there with no expectation. I was like, I will judge it purely on my own. But oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm European. You have no idea. It was such a crazy experience. But, in general, I lived there for 6 months, which unfortunately I was supposed to stay there for at least 12, up to 2 years I could. But unfortunately, through to sort of outside circumstances, I had to come back after 6 months, which I'm sure doesn't feel like a lot, especially for you who, lived somewhere. You are like, oh yeah, I lived there for 13 years and I lived there for 2 years and so on and so on. I lived somewhere for 6 months, which is not a lot. But my point here is that I don't think it matters for how long you are there. I think it's the act of moving abroad, because I think that's the hardest part of it, to actually put the thought out there and start acting on it. Because as I already mentioned, so many people are thinking about it, so many people are dreaming about it, but basically no one ever makes that first step. And I understand that it's not for everybody. It's so hard. I almost gave up. I'm not sure if you remembered, but like few days before I was actually supposed to leave, I was talking to you, and I'm someone who wants to live abroad. Like I will be moving abroad, early in 2026 again and so on. I'm so excited about it. But I remember sitting there like 2 days prior my departure, talking to you, and I was like, Nick, I'm not doing that. Why did you let me go this far? Like, I'm not doing that. Like, do something and keep me here. I'm absolutely not leaving. I'm not ready for it. And you told me I'm an idiot. And
Don't think I would
yeah,
have
I was
ever
like,
used those words to you, but I do
yeah,
remember
no, you said that in that your passive aggressive way of being an Englishman. So basically, no, you never said you are an idiot, but that's how I translated it, knowing you.
needing to just I knew that would happen, that there would be that moment just before you leave that you think, oh no, what have I done? And actually it's quite a valid point, because it's one thing to have all these ideas and to get excited about the travel, but then it's that moment when, in your case, you were going to the airport. I mean, it could be a train station, it could even be a port for ships and the like, but most of us will fly when we go abroad, I suppose. And it's that moment when you have to go through customs and you say goodbye to your loved ones there and then, and you're not going to see them for a long time. That's the first moment that it's going to hit you a bit, and you start to think,
It
and you
was it was the hardest thing about it, the very hardest.
then the next thing that happens is that there is the excitement of the travel and then arriving there, but it's then once you've unpacked wherever you're going to be living, and then you start to actually have to embrace normal life, because if you're going to be living there, it's not a holiday. You're not doing the holiday type stuff. Getting up in the morning and you're having to go to work or go to school or university or whatever. You're doing something that is so totally normal, but always before you've done it in your home environment where you're comfortable. And that's when it first hits you. And I remember when that hit me in Saudi Arabia, and it took 2 or 3 days, and then I just started thinking, oh my God, this is it. I'm here now. I'm stuck here. There was no possibility of going home for at least 6 months. So that kind of hit me then. And I remember when I moved to Czechia and I was living in Prague and I was studying, or arrived there, we had an apartment already in the center of Prague. And I was then enrolled at a school to go and learn how to teach English as a foreign language. And it was after my first day in this school, which was again right in the center of Prague. And then I was leaving there to go and take the tram home. There's only about 7 or 8 minutes on the tram, and walking down the street and thinking, I live here now. This is my home. And very different feeling to when I was in Saudi Arabia, thinking, this is my home. Yay. Because Prague is a pretty cool place to live, actually. But just going back to what you were saying earlier about growing up and somehow having this bug in you that you want to travel. And it just made me think, I mean, there are people who would argue, I'm not necessarily one of them, but there were people who would argue that there was something in a past life that you lived that has led you to be this traveler, to have this wanderlust.
Maybe.
Sometimes it makes me wonder, why do we have these kind of motivations that come from nowhere? Basically, they're not coming to us from our immediate surroundings or our immediate family or friends. It's just something that's in you, I guess.
That's the rabbit hole we are not getting into right now. I always felt like I was born in the wrong country. I never really felt connected to my nationality or to my country. And to this day, I'm saying that I was just born in the wrong country and then I was supposed to be born somewhere else. And then there was some error and I ended up in Czech Republic. I mean, the worst place that I could end up in, but not my place to be. It's so fun how you sort of remember Prague like, oh, that was such a nice place to live. And for me, it's like, not a huge fan. But, obviously that's because I was born here. So that's obviously different. But back to what I was saying, because I feel like now what we are talking about here is, yeah, move abroad, like take all of your things and just move abroad forever. But I don't want this to be point of it because I think that, as I already said, I don't think it's about actually living abroad, but it's about the action of moving abroad. And I think that the time you spend there doesn't really matter if it's 10, 20 years or if it's, a month, if it's not a vacation, because that's obviously, a different, you already said that you're doing, classic holiday things and visiting sites and so on. But if you actually move there to work, study, whatever, it can be only a month. I think it's about the action because, I kind of want to mention my friend here who lived abroad for, I think it was a month or two. I'm not quite sure now. And she'd done it before I went to America. And, it was quite a short time. It was over summer holiday. And she came back and it changed her. And the way she was talking about it was just so incredible despite the short time. And then, I was in America for 6 months and it gave me the same thing. So I think that if you are open minded enough, and if it's something you always wanted, and if you go there to learn something about yourself, if you have your why are you doing that? It doesn't matter for how long you do it, because the thing is about actually doing it and taking it from a thought, an idea, a dream to real life, to action.
Oh, yeah, that's a very good point because one of the things when I went to Saudi Arabia, and when I'd first sort of applied for this job, I must have been in my very late 20s because it took about between 9 months and a year from first applying till actually getting on the plane. And one of the things I was kind of conscious of the fact that I felt that I was immature for my age. And I just thought that maybe this experience would grow me up. And I said that to people before I left. And boy, was that true because going there, two things. First of all, as I mentioned, the work, the level of experience, the amount of things I could do just would have taken forever in the good 10 years, I would estimate, in the UK, for example. And because I was on TV every day, very quickly, within 3 weeks, I became recognizable to people. I suppose a celebrity, a star. I remember one particular evening, I used to be able to have a break at around about 6 or 7 o'clock in the evenings. There's not a whole lot to do there because obviously no bars and clubs or anything like that. But I would go to a shopping mall. There are lots of shopping malls there, and way more than we did in England at that time. So I go to a shopping mall, and there would be a restaurant I could go into and have an alcohol-free meal. So I would do this. And then one evening I'd gone to the shopping mall, and when I got there, there was something like 4 or 5 buses, coaches, just pulling up. And their passengers were all nurses, and it was obviously their evening out that they were allowed. And so there was like something like between 100 and 200 nurses, mostly from the Philippines, I believe. And as I'm walking across the car park, and all these nurses started looking, they were pointing at something. So I'm looking over my shoulder. What are they looking at? And I thought, oh no, it's me. So 200 autographs later, I was finally able to go into the shopping mall. So then I learned something about celebrity. It's actually quite intrusive. But I have to say that I had always wanted to experience what it's like. And I'm glad I did in a kind of safe place, if you like. And now I'm not quite so interested. But it was just an example of one of the levels of experience I was able to get. On the downside, because as I say, there's upsides and downsides, there was a lot of difficulty in dealing with life there, the bureaucracy, some things to do with culture. Both the upsides and the downsides of living there did change me, and it did grow me up. I came back after a couple of years, a different person, completely different person. And someone who's, my mind had been opened to the world, if you like. And, I think there is much to admire in Arabic and Middle Eastern culture. And there are some things that maybe we don't get on with as well in the West. But I was able to see it all and come back with a balanced view. And it did change me. It goes back to what I said before. Travel genuinely broadens the mind, and it broadens your character and personality as well.
Yeah, it will, as you said, it will grow you up, but in a way that no matter your age, I feel it will just unlock a certain part of you that you have no other chance to unlock otherwise, other than, traveling. And, again, it's not for some people, but I think that if you are open-minded enough, it will always, give you something new. But at the same time, obviously, you can do that any age. But I think, I mean, like, in my opinion, you should, if that's something you want to do, and not just traveling, but moving abroad, if that's something you want to do, I think the best time to do it is in your 20s. Because if you think about it, it's, it will change you, it will form you, it will open your mind. And teenage years and then eventually your 20s are the most formative years of your life. And obviously, when you are a teenager, you can't really do that alone and it's more complicated. But in your 20s, you can, and you usually don't have anything to hold you back. Because then, as you already mentioned, you went to Saudi Arabia when you were married with a baby, which, so many people wouldn't do because you have some sort of responsibility or you have a stable career and so on and so on. But I feel like in your 20s, especially at the beginning of your 20s, you don't have that. You have nothing stable in your life. That, on one hand, obviously, it's scary and it makes you anxious, having no stability in your life. On the other hand, that's why it's the best time to do all of this. Because, before I went away, before I moved away, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. No idea. I was done with high school. I had some sort of working experience and I wanted to go back to school, but I had no idea what I wanted to study. And I remember telling myself before I went to America that if there is something I want to achieve, it's finding myself and it's finding what I want from life and who I am. And after just 6 months, I came back with exactly that. And I really dare to say that I know myself right now, at least, to a certain point at my age. And I came back with knowing what I want to do, what my next steps will be, what I want to study, what I want to spend my time and energy on. And so I came back exactly with that. And I think it was 100% worth it, despite all of the bad things and all of the challenges that were there. And, again, I feel like it's such an individual experience traveling or moving abroad that you have to know what you want from it. Because I knew. I didn't really go there to, stay in America and live there or to travel all around America or stuff like that. People around me did. Girls in the same situation as me, they did. And that's great because they knew what they wanted. I didn't want that. I went there to find myself. And I think that's really important before you do something like that to realize what you want from it. But also, there are things that even when you know that it will happen to you, you just can't really be ready for it. For example, if you are moving abroad, you know that you will be lonely to a certain point, no matter if it's just country next to yours or if it's over half of the world away. Because, I mean, obviously, time differences are a thing or stuff like that. But, today with social media and technology, it's doable. But, you are planning to move abroad and you know that you will feel alone, but you can't get ready for that. You can't be ready for that. And I'm someone who doesn't really need people around myself. I'm fine with being alone. I'm fine with being lonely. But there are points when it just hits you. And it's one of the worst things about moving abroad because, no matter what people you have around yourself, sometimes, and I'm someone who fixes her own problems on her own. I'm always fixing my problems on my own. I'm always my own therapist, my own friend. I'm just used to it. But there were moments that I had when I just felt like I needed to call my mom or call my best friend or call you. And, obviously I was in contact with you guys, but then I just had this urge and it was like 4 in the morning in Czech Republic or in Europe. And I couldn't just pick up my phone and call you because you all were asleep. And these are the little details that you just don't realize until it's happening to you. And it's not easy, but because, I'm trying to look at these things as opportunities to learn about yourself, I think that this loneliness will make you rely on yourself more and it will make you enjoy your own company. And, I think I already mentioned this in this podcast that I spent my 21st birthday alone, basically. And it was the best birthday ever. And, I don't want to sound ungrateful or something because I have great friends, I have great family. And obviously, people were texting me, calling me. My mom sent me a birthday present. You did send me a birthday present, which was so nice. But, the day I spent in my own company doing things that I wanted to do, and it was great. And as you mentioned, I think that all of these little things will grow you up and will just give you something that nothing else can ever give you.
It's true. I just want to pick up on that point because you talked about being able to stay in contact, social media, the digital world. You and I were WhatsApping most nights of the week, actually. Well, it was nighttime for me. It was 5 o'clock for you in America. But I want to take you back to show you the contrast from when I was in Saudi, going back to that again. But it's picking up also on the point of, when you are lonely and you are away from the people that you ideally you want to be with, your family, your loved ones, which I was the whole of the time in Saudi. I was there living on my own, basically. I made some very good friends with quite a lot of Americans and Saudis. I had a lot of good Saudi friends and also other various nationalities from around the Middle East. But of course, nothing can substitute for your own family. And in those days, communication was really difficult. We used to write letters. So I would write a letter to my mother, to my wife, and, long letters. So something that you would
That's
sit
crazy.
down for an hour, couple of hours to do. Then you would have to take it to the post office and post it, and it would take a week to get there. So then they get a letter, then they could read it, and then maybe 2 or 3 days later, they will then reply. So basically, a conversation like we would have on through email or something instantly. Over there, when I was in those days, in the old analog days of snail, a conversation would effectively take 3 weeks between each part of the chat. So it did make it very different. And of course, this was in the mid 80s, so pre-internet. So in terms of news, getting news from home and newspapers, we did get English newspapers, but they would be 2 days after the event. So for a lot of news and a lot of just actually connecting with your home culture, it would just be slightly out of date. Generally, you felt a bit cut off. That's the thing. And you didn't feel like you were part of the rest of the world. Whereas traveling now, honestly, it doesn't matter where you are because all you've got to do is be somewhere where you know you've got Wi-Fi and you're connected to the whole world. So the loneliness thing or the feeling of isolation, slightly different, is really, really kind of removed from the equation now. The world is becoming in a way, a much smaller place because of that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I can't imagine. And like honestly, you now make me feel a little bit ungrateful because here I was complaining like, oh, I couldn't call my mom because it was 4 in the morning, and you're like, yeah, I wrote like a letter a week. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But that's exactly what I was talking about before, that that's why I think that my generation has it much easier in that way, and why we talk about it much more. Because, for me, it was even hard with, FaceTiming back home and everything like that. And I was thinking about it for a long time, even before I left. And sometimes it was hard. But I still did it because I was like, okay, I will still be able to text you and FaceTime you and so on and so on. But if I got this idea and someone told me, okay, you will only be able to write letters and receive letters like once a week, once every 2 weeks, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Just when you were talking about it, I felt anxious. It was secondhand anxiety because I'm such a I'm an anxious person. I worry about people a lot. And the idea that I'm living my life on daily basis without knowing what's happening with people around me, that's insane. That's insane. I'm that crazy that, sometimes when some of my friends or my family didn't text me for a long while, I went to stalk them on social media and see when they were active. So I knew they were all right. If like my mom promised me to text me and she didn't, I was obviously worried. And then I saw that she was active like 5 minutes ago on Instagram. And I was like, okay, she just forgot about me, but I know she's all right because she was active on Instagram. You know what I'm saying?
I
I
do.
could never imagine not being able to just know if they're all right. And if I didn't get this opportunity, I would never leave. Maybe that will be one of the reasons why my generation probably travels more and moves abroad more, because it's easier in this way.
Something else I would say to be an upside of that is that in my experience, wherever you've traveled, and I think I tried to count how many countries I've been to, but it's somewhere between 60 and 70 around the world. Wherever you go, you will find people from your country. Remarkably, you always will. Wherever I've gone, you will always find Brits. That's pretty much a given.
Yeah, with English people, I'm not surprised. You
Well,
guys are everywhere.
the English are, and historically have been for hundreds of years, inveterate travellers, but that's a whole other story and a historical thing. You will always find Irish people, and you'll always find any city you go to in the world. I don't think there's a city that doesn't have an Irish pub. There's always at least one Irish pub, and always well worth going to because the Irish do know how to party. Everywhere I've gone since I've been involved in Czech life, always found Czechs. Not very many, but there's always been somewhere, even in the most unlikely places, in an
Mm.
obscure restaurant at the western end of the island of Crete, and then suddenly hearing Czech spoken on the table next to us. Wow, how'd that happen?
Czech, Czech or Slovakian people. I met a Slovakian woman like that in the village that I was living in America. And the whole time I was in America, I never met a single Czech person. But I remember I was, in the library in a small village after 4 months living there. And suddenly I heard a language that was quite familiar, but it didn't really click. And only then I saw a woman talking with her son, and she was Slovakian. And it was so beautiful because, I'm not really someone who would approach strangers. And this woman was like in her, I don't know, 30s, 40s. But it just made me feel so close to home that I went there and I was like, hey, I'm so sorry, but I'm Czech and I heard you. And it was such a beautiful, human moment when we just bonded over something like that, because she was like, I don't know any Czech or Slovakian people around. So it was, even for her, it was so beautiful.
It is one of the things that will happen when you travel is that you will meet people. Quite often, people that will become important in your life, people that will stay as part of your life. And I know that's happened to me and to other people I know. And part of it is that I think the inhibitions that you might have at home about going and talking to a stranger kind of go out of the window when you're away. As you say, you heard
Absolutely.
somebody speaking Slovakian, so you went over and said hello. If you were in a cafe in your hometown in Czechia and you heard somebody speaking Slovakian, well, you wouldn't necessarily think that much of it. It wouldn't be that unusual. But maybe if you heard somebody speaking English, you would feel not quite so brave, maybe, about going over and saying hello. Maybe you would. I don't know.
Oh. With English, I might because, you know, and that's another topic that I kind of want to cover sometime, is that my personality in English is so different.
Mm.
When I was in America, I didn't have problem talking with people, and in English,
And a point that I want to make there, when you say about how your personality as an English speaker is different from your personality as a Czech speaker, I completely get it. That totally does work. So something I would say as a word of advice to anybody who's traveling is that having a good knowledge of English is going to really help you because, rightly or wrongly, all over the world, English will be spoken.
well, but speaking English or any other language is not for everybody. And, you know, as we already talked about, this whole thing, moving abroad, traveling, and so on, is not for everybody in general. But if it's for you, I think you feel it. And, you know, there's this quote that I absolutely love. I have no idea where I read it or heard it. It was probably somewhere on social media ages ago. But to this day, it's just still in my head. And I love it because I'm someone who really believes in destiny and these things. And the quote goes something like, if there is a place, a country, or a city that you always felt attached to without any reason, it means that your story is already written and something or someone is waiting for you in that country or in that city. And I love it. It's just so great. It makes me, you know, so hopeful that all of these places have reason in my life. Did you ever feel like that?
Well, it's funny you should say that because I did. I had started getting a thing about a certain city in the early 90s and started reading about it, and it started to become very fashionable in England for people to go there for long weekends. And we started to learn about the history. And that place was Prague, funnily enough. And that really was very early 90s. I remember it quite distinctly and how I was getting interested and reading about Prague in magazines and so forth. Then later in that decade, I met some Czech people locally who were living and working close to where I lived in the southwest suburbs of London. I ended up marrying one of these people and I ended up living in Prague. There is a country that I've always been fascinated with, but have never been to, and that is Argentina. So I think there's still possibly something there, that some unfulfilled business. I've always had a certain fascination with Argentina. What about you?
Maybe.
Do you have anywhere?
I do, and you will laugh at me. Because for me, it was always London, always. I don't know why. Also it was France. For a long time, since I was very little, I was absolutely obsessed with Paris and with France, to the point when I started learning French on my own when I was 10 years old. I didn't even speak proper English when I was 10, but I started self-studying French. And when I was, I think, 11 or 12, I was so obsessed with it that my father took me to Paris for a week, and it was just so great. And funnily enough, to this day, I'm really connected to France. And when I was studying art, I was always really connected to French artists. And as you know, I speak a bit of French and I'm still learning French. So I think there is something going on. And, you know, obviously it didn't happen yet, but I feel it will. And then since I was a bit older, but again, I was like 10, 13 maybe, it was London for me for some reason. And I've been there twice. And every time it just felt right. There was something within me that I was just like, yeah, that's where I belong. And you know, I still can't explain it. And I will probably have to wait for a while before I see if my story is written there. And, you know, for now, it's Ireland. Funny enough, Ireland was one of the places too. Even years before I was thinking about going to live there or study there, I always liked it. And so, maybe part of my story is written in Ireland, then England, then maybe France. Who knows? But it definitely is. From what I know, quite certainly, is that I never felt that connection to Czech Republic. And I don't think my story is written here.
Okay. But what about you? What about your story? Where do you feel like traveling to? Let us know. Where would you like to go? Or where have you been? Or have you tried living abroad? Tell us about it.
You can leave us a comment on any platform you are listening on, or you can write us a message at our Instagram at lifehappens.podcast.